All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody. My name is Denise Harlow. I am CEO of the National Community Action Partnership. And today we are doing one of our semi-annual Community Action 101, kind of laying the foundation for what do we need to know as community action folks, a little bit about our history, how we got to today, and kind of a little bit about where we're headed. We're going to talk a little bit about how the network is structured. There are so many moving parts, which in many ways we're blessed with in community action to have a lot of infrastructure, but it sometimes can be a challenge in terms of getting our hands around all of the different assets and opportunities we have with partners in our network. Thank you so much, everybody, putting in the chat. I see folks from all over the place. We got LaGrange, Georgia. We got Kentucky. Oh, Akron's in the house. Sacramento, Schenectady Community Action Program, the CAP agency I started at. Nice to see you here, Kristen. Excellent. Northeast Kansas Community Action, Virginia Cares. Good to see a statewide organization. Knox County Community Action Committee, Audubon, all over the place. Well, part of the reason I just also want to welcome folks, but it's great to see folks from all over the country because you, as a local community action agency staff member, board member, volunteer, you are a part of a national network of organizations that we're going to talk about here today. So thank you for being with us. We are recording today's webinar. So we'll make the slide deck and the recording available to you. I'm going to go through some stuff, but please use the chat window to ask questions. We have a couple people behind the scenes, including Mary Beth Schneber-Remrev, our Director of Organizational Capacity Building, and Denise Waits, who does a lot of our organizational coordination and administrative work. So both of them behind the scenes will be able to flag some items for me as we go through here today. We also have the Q&A window open, so feel free to ask a question in the Q&A window as well. And we'll pause periodically to pivot to your questions or comments. So again, thank you everybody for being with us here today. If you've come to any of our things at the partnership, you know that we always start with the promise of community action. So let's do that here today. I'll read it out loud. Please read it on your side of the screen as well. Community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. And we're going to talk a bit about how this promise embeds itself in all parts of the network. Every CAP agency has its different mission statement. You might have a different logo. You might have a different name at your organization. So the promise really binds us all together as a national network. As a national network, we have over 1,000 local community action agencies, 75% of which are nonprofit, 501c3 charitable nonprofits. The other 25% are what we call public CAPs, or units of local government. What makes a community action agency a community action agency, is something called the Community Services Block Grant, CSBG. And I'll be using CSBG as we go out throughout our presentation here today and reference it periodically. CSBG is part of the federal budget. It flows through the Department of Health and Human Services, through the Administration for Children and Families, to the Office of Community Services. The money then goes out to states, which are key partners in our network, and then to you at the local agency level. In addition to local agencies, we have 45, 46 state associations around the country, as well as regional associations. And again, our state CSBG offices, our state weatherization offices, and then there are a myriad of other partners across our network that we'll reference here today. But in a typical year, we serve anywhere between 13 and 15 million people every year. And I think that's a low number. We'll talk a little bit about why that might be. But a lot of services such as transportation don't always collect all of the individuals that we serve over the course of a year. So please know that you are part of the national infrastructure to fight poverty across America. Sergeant Shriver, you're going to hear me talk about him here as well. Sergeant Shriver is kind of the grandfather of community action. He was the first director of the Office of Economic Opportunity. OEO was the first federal office where community action was born out of, which came out of the Economic Opportunity Act in 1964. I love this quote. What can change the world today is the same thing that has changed it in the past. An idea in the service of dedicated and committed individuals to that idea. That is you. As community action, we can change this world. We are committed to this idea of that we must end poverty in America, and together, there's nothing we can't do. So as we get started here today, please put into the chat, when you think about community action, what's the one word that kind of comes to your mind? Some of you may have been in community action for 2 weeks. Some of you may have been in community action for 20 years. But what are some of those terms and words that come to your mind? Service, support, hope, assistance, dignity, hope, a lot of hope. We embody the spirit of hope, don't we? Uplift, grit. There's a word for you. Advocacy, something close to my heart. Resources, change, fellowship, yes, togetherness. Ooh, tenacity, that's a good one too. Unknown, I'll give you some, we're not the most well-known network across America, that's for sure. Compassion, understanding. Thank you. Everyone comes to this work from a different place. Different parts of our network resonate for us differently. And depending on the day, different parts resonate for us individually as well. This is a slide of 3 talking points that we've developed to help explain what community action agencies do to the broader world. Now, feel free to take any of this content from the webinar and use it in your own local agency if it's helpful. This is a lot of the way we like to talk about it. Community action agencies connect individuals and families to approaches that help them succeed. We connect people to different approaches, different programs. We're not a child care entity, right? We're not a housing entity. We're not an emergency food entity. We might do all of those pieces, but we're not known for one particular program. Second, we promote community and system-wide solution to seemingly stubborn challenges. There's a term of art that poverty is a wicked problem, right? It's one of those problems that's complex, it's nuanced, it's different everywhere, and there's no one easy fix to address it. So community action, we know that poverty and service structure looks different in Des Moines than it might in Detroit, than it might in Dallas. And community action agencies have to pivot in their community to fight those stubborn challenges. And third, people always want to say we want to fund, we know what works. That's who we are, right? We share our expertise. We partner. We say, please, help us out, partner with us, collaborate with us. And we connect our national, state, and local leaders who are looking for evidence on what works to what actually does. And community action, you know what works in your local community. And what we can do is convey that information to policymakers, funders, regulatory systems folks, administration folks, and share with them that our knowledge matters across America. As I mentioned, your agency, your state association, your state office, wherever you come from within the network, you're part of 1,000 local agencies from across this country. And I just picked 3 states. There's no one way community action agencies reflect themselves in local communities or even across states. Some states have a lot of individual county community action agencies. I mentioned I started in New York. It's Schenectady Community Action Program. There's also Albany Community Action Program. There's Commission on Economic Opportunity in Rensselaer County. 3 counties that serve the Capital District each have their own community action agency. You go to, let's say, Minnesota, and you'll have an agency that serves 5 or 6 different counties. You go to Texas, you get an agency who might serve this area with CSBG, but then they serve so many square miles when it comes to the rest of their programs. There's no one way a CAP agency is designed. You need a pretty long elevator sometimes to talk about your community action story. Here are a variety of services that community action agencies operate. Everything from emergency assistance, healthcare. We have about 24 community action agencies that are federally qualified health centers. We do weatherization. We do Head Start, early Head Start, child care partnerships. We have connections with community colleges. We do a lot of family-centered coaching. We do a lot of operations around the whole family approach to helping families move out of poverty and toward economic security. All different things, all different places, but all bound together for the mission and purpose of community action. I love this quote from Bryan Stevenson. If you ever get a chance to read Just Mercy or visit the museum that he founded in Alabama, I encourage you to do so. This quote: "The opposite of poverty isn't wealth. The opposite of poverty is justice." And for me, this truly resonates about what community action really is. When we talk about embodying the spirit of hope, hope is not a wishy-washy Pollyanna kind of thing in my book. Hope is real. We talk to families who've experienced a level of economic mobility with the assistance of community action. They talk about coming into a community action agency and feeling supported, feeling respected, feeling that sense of belonging that community action can create. In our country, we know through COVID, right, we had the child tax credit that went into the hands of families. We cut the child poverty rate almost in half. We know that cash can make a difference in the lives of families, but we're not continuing the child tax credit requirement, are we? But we have to fight for justice to ensure that all families have the opportunities to succeed. Now, you're going to say, well, Denise, I worked for other nonprofits. I worked for other human service organizations. We partner. Are we really all that different? And I would say, yes, we are different. Just as Salvation Army has its own unique culture, its own history, its important historical resonance in our society, community action is the same way. Excuse me, got a frog in my throat. We are different. We are unique. We have our own history. We reflect local needs and local concerns and local resources in different ways. The Red Cross is a critically important partner, but when you hear Red Cross, you kind of know what they do, right? Catholic Charities, Lutheran Social Services, Jewish Federation in America, right? We understand there are faith-based entities as well. And I will say I've run across a lot of people in community action who come to this work out of faith, whatever their faith culture might be or faith history might be for their family. But we are a secular-based arm of this human services infrastructure across America. We have a federal mandate, federal in statute, to fight poverty. The poverty measure, though, the federal guidelines for poverty are located within the CSPG Act. And we are the national infrastructure, just like you wouldn't want to have, fire departments have to compete for grants necessarily because you always need that emergency response system. CSPG and community action provide that national, long-standing infrastructure to help families mitigate the causes and conditions of poverty. I'm going to pause here to see if there's anything in the chat. I don't see anything so far, but I do see you weren't familiar with that quote, but there is a lot of truth to the Bryan Stevenson quote. I encourage you to pick up Just Mercy and get to know Mr. Stevenson's work more thoroughly. He's wonderful. We are highly accountable as a network. Don't let anybody ever tell you any different. Sometimes people say that we're not all that accountable, but as a network, we are audited. We are monitored to outside of, I've had agency directors say, Denise, I have a monitor in my office almost every day of the year. We are highly accountable as a network, as individual organizations. We have a tripartite board structure. Some of you know what that is. Others of you are like, how do I say that? Tripartite what? It is Latin, I guess. But what that means is that our boards are of and from community. Our governing boards of directors are made up of 1/3 democratically selected individuals from communities with low income. There's a lot of explanation in other webinars that can explain exactly what that means. But in layperson's terms, that means that people who are living in poverty have a right to have control over these resources. They have a right to have a voice, and that we see that people who are experiencing poverty and receiving services from programs are the best carriers of the knowledge about what works in communities. They have a seat at the table. 1/3 of the board are elected officials in the bluest, most of California, maybe the reddest of Kansas, whatever metaphor you want to use, right? Because elected officials have a responsibility also to ensure that their communities are healthy, that they're thriving, and they have a role to make sure that poverty is addressed in their local communities. And then the 1/3 comes from the private sector. This applies both to nonprofit caps and public caps in terms of an advisory board. If you're a public cap, you probably have an advisory body of some sort that has this tripartite structure. The other thing that makes this different is a local needs assessment. If you're running Head Start, you have to do a Head Start needs assessment. We have other groups who have to do community assessments, whether it's around healthcare, mental health, HIV. Community action agencies have to look at the entirety of the community as it comes to poverty and resources in local community. Poverty is different as we navigate year after year after year. Poverty ebbs and flows in communities. Communities are not static. The pandemic certainly had an impact on poverty and economic security for families. About, 2007, 2008, the Great Recession had a significant impact also on poverty and changed things in different ways. Different points in history change poverty in different ways. But in community action, we're here to be responsive, right? We're addressing income disparities, wealth disparities, racial inequality and inequity across America. We see the educational disparities, the health disparities, right? All these pieces ebb and flow in different communities at different times. But what community action does is that we have to pivot, we have to modify, we address our needs as we see them. And today we're going to talk about different points in time. Some of you may be watching this as you prepare to go down your CCAP road of study. Those of you who are new are going, what's a CCAP? And we'll talk a little about the Certified Community Action Professional. But part of becoming a community action professional, whether you're certified or not, is to know our history, right? And so we're going to talk about the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, the aughts, the 10s, the 20s, and kind of what's ahead. In January of 1964, what is that, 63 years and 11 months ago, right? President Johnson in the State of the Union said, "Let us carry forward the plans and programs of John F. Kennedy, not because of our sorrow or sympathy, but because they are right." This administration today, here and now, declares an unconditional war on poverty in America. Our joint federal-local effort must pursue poverty, pursue it wherever it exists. President Kennedy, before he was assassinated, had in his purview that he was going to address poverty. After President Johnson became president, he leaned in on fighting poverty across America. You can go onto YouTube and find the video of this of his State of the Union where he declares this unconditional war on poverty. Now, it takes a while sometimes to move things along, right? A president can have an idea, a president can push something forward, but it was almost light speed when it comes to federal legislation. In August of that same year, he was signing the Economic Opportunity Act. That's the picture of him actually signing it in the Rose Garden of the White House in August of 1964. Part of this, right, this still resonates with us today. The United States can achieve its full and economic, social potential as a nation only if every individual has the opportunity to contribute to the full extent of his, her, or their capabilities and to participate in the workings of our society. And it is therefore the policy of the United States to eliminate the, quote, paradox of poverty amidst plenty. And I think today in 2023 and 2024, whenever you're watching this video, the paradox of poverty amidst plenty is something that we're having to address and think about and talk about in community action. The world looks different today than it did in 1964. We need different technologies, however, in today's day and age to navigate employment, to navigate education, to navigate services, to navigate shopping, to navigate so much in our society. So again, this paradox of poverty amidst plenty, I think, is still a real issue that we struggle with in community action and how we talk about that. But we know it to be the case. In addition, I love this, right? The basic purpose of community action. This is from our founding legislation. To stimulate a better focusing of all available local, state, private, and federal resources upon the goal of enabling low-income families and low-income individuals to attain the skills, knowledge, and motivations to help them become self-sufficient. Now, we could all take issue with probably some of the terminology that's used here, but to stimulate all available resources. That means, do we just talk about CSBG? No. Because CSBG is about, $800 million a year that comes in. This network leverages more than $14 billion, $16 billion every year to fight the causes again, because we are stimulating a focusing of all resources, volunteer time, donations, in-kind and cash, federal money, state money, philanthropy to fight poverty across America. What else is turning, what else was in the Economic Opportunity Act, right? VISTA, Job Corps, Head Start, community health centers, foster grandparents, legal services, neighborhood centers, summer youth programs. It wasn't just community action in 1964. There was a true investment in fighting poverty across America. So as we go forward in our history from 1964 to 1967, today's community action, right? We talked a little bit about the tripartite structure. And we're going to talk about how in these moments of time throughout history, we've had to kind of pivot to save community action. Part of this happened in 1967. There was a push and concern about community action having money going directly from the federal government directly to local agencies. There was some concern about local agencies, local folks kind of doing stuff that maybe mayors and other elected officials were more concerned about. They wanted to make sure that there was an elected voice at that table, not just folks living with low income making decisions, because back in the day, it was just about the community organization. There wasn't the tripartite. But in 1967, the Green Amendment designated that the elected officials had the authority to designate a community action agency in their local community. And also the Quay Amendment mandated the tripartite structure that we still have to this day. So these pieces were put into place to help us navigate those challenging years of 1967-68. And now we are using the tripartite board, I think, in a way to ensure that the full community is in place to address poverty. In 1969, Nixon appoints Donald Rumsfeld, those of you who have been around a while, yes, that Donald Rumsfeld, as the director of the Office of Economic Opportunity under President Nixon. He also hires Dick Cheney, name from our past, right? And Christy Todd Whitman as assistants, both of whom have authorship over some of the materials in the Office of Economic Opportunity. This particular memo was authored by Donald Rumsfeld, which for me is always fascinating, right? But it talks here that a CAA's effectiveness, right, isn't about the services that you provide. Those of you who are Roma trainers or Roma implementers or Roma professionals, right, you know all about the outcome piece of our work, right? It's stated right here, is that We are measured by the improvements and changes that community action achieves in a community's attitudes and practices toward the poor and in the allocation of resources. It's not about the services, it's about the outcomes. So let's continue during those 1960s or the 1970s of the Nixon years. I encourage you, if you have a chance to attend David Bradley's 2-day War on Poverty workshop, I encourage you to do so. David Bradley's War on Poverty, he goes deep dive into all of this history. We're just kind of touching on it a little bit here today. The picture on your screen is of Charlie Braithwaite. This hangs in our offices, so I get to walk by Charlie frequently. President Nixon tried to zero out and end community action. The memos went out, basically told community action agencies to close the doors, you're no longer going to be funded. But community action stood up to the Nixon administration and fought back. Charlie Braithwaite and others filed lawsuits against the Nixon administration and won. And community action stands here to this day. 1973 to 1974 was Gerald Ford's administration. We pivoted from the Office of Economic Opportunity to the Community Services Act of 1974. Again, this was a chance to survive presidential transitions, survive presidential priorities, and maintain community action for the long term. However, once you get past the Ford years, then you go through President Carter, and then you get into President Reagan. President Nixon tried shutting us down. President Ford, right, we had to pivot and lose the Office of Economic Opportunity and moved into the CSA. President Reagan was another attempt he did this across federal government, right? What can we do to take from the feds and give to the states? What can the federal government do to kind of get out of the business and move funding down to state level decisions and local decisions? So in 1981, and to ensure that community action survived, David Bradley, who is still with us over at NCAF and is our key lobbyist on the Hill, fought for and designed the Community Services Block Grant. It allowed what used to be under the CSA, the Office of Economic Opportunity, those dollars to be funneled instead of going right from the federal government to local agencies. He said, okay, we can make this work. We can create a block grant. The monies then go from the feds to the state offices, and the state CSBG office became a thing, right? I'm not sure the right way to say that, but it became a thing, right? So, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a moment. In 1981, right, it became the block grant, the CSBG offices. So now local agencies, just like you do today, right? You get your CSBG directly from the state office, and then you are monitored by and report to your state office. By statute, 90% of the CSBG funds have to go to local agencies. In some states, it's 95%, depending on your rules, but 90% must go to local agencies. The state can keep up to 5% for administration. And what's supposed to happen is that other 5% is supposed to be for other discretionary purposes. Oftentimes that goes to state associations, it might go to other special projects. Sometimes it goes to community action agencies, and sometimes it goes to other projects. It just really depends on the state. In 1994, we had the Clinton-Gore years, and this piece about having to prove what we do works. That wasn't just community action and CSBG. It was across federal government, right? We need to know what works across America. So community action responded just like we did every other time. We created the Monitoring and Assessment Task Force. And through this process, created 6 national goals and developed ROMA. ROMA's results-oriented management and accountability. It allowed us again to frame up our work around national performance indicators and 6 national goals. Since 1984, CSBG has been reauthorized 5 times. Why do you reauthorize? Well, because times change. Federal legislation, right, creates programs in one moment in time, and 10 years later, the world is different. So maybe those programs need to modify. We know different things. Research has shown different things. Technology has shifted. Same thing in community action, right? We've been reauthorized in 84, 86, 90, 94. 1998 was our last time that we've been reauthorized. David Bradley from NCAF works every year on getting CSBG reauthorized. The political environment is what it is, and having to navigate a lot of that, but we are always hopeful. I probably should take off the question marks for 2023, given that it's December 11th when we're recording this, shouldn't I? But will it be 2024? David is the lead on CSPG reauthorization, but always pay attention. You never know when things are going to be happening. All right, so between 2000 and 2011, Community Action rebranded in 2000. In 2001, Roma was really mandated to go into effect, but those of you who are around in 2001, 9/11 certainly pressed pause on a lot of things across this country, including some of the modernization of community action, as we were embracing Roma and reporting and things like that. So things needed to pause for a while. But 04, 05, the national performance indicators, as I mentioned, 07 was the Great Recession. And then you had the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act in 2009. Just like CARES did during COVID, brought $1 billion of CSBG. It brought so much money into weatherization. It brought money into a lot of different federal programs so that we could be on the front lines of helping our country survive the Great Recession. And then we have 2011, President Obama's State of the Union. We talked about President Nixon. We talked about President Ford. We talked about President Reagan. President Obama in his State of the Union in 2011 actually said that we all have to cut programs that we deeply care about, like community action. In President Obama's budget that year, he proposed to cut CSBG in half and put the rest of the money out to bid for competition, claiming that people didn't know what community action was producing, what kind of outcomes it was producing. Well, what happened is that the network said, well, wait a minute, just like we have done in other administrations, you have your facts wrong. Community action knows what works. Community action demonstrates its outcomes. Let's talk about reframing how we demonstrate what we know. And we did that through a few different things. We modernized our results-oriented management and accountability system. We created the organizational standards, the CSBG organizational standards, and we created performance measures for states and for the federal OCS office. We updated our performance management system. And I would argue that we had great success with that. The network's budget later during the Obama years fully supported funding to community action, took out the competition request, really leaned into what community action is and does every day. So just touching on those for a little bit, those of you who are Roma trainers, right? We still throw in next generation sometimes, although I think it's just Roma at this point. We have a national theory of change that we'll show you here in a moment. We talk about outcomes. We have a CSBG annual report, refreshed national performance indicators. And we really try to talk about integrating all parts of the Roma cycle, right? We assess, we plan, we implement, we deploy and document our achievement of results, and we analyze our data. The Roma cycle is just good business practice. And next gen, we really embed that in a lot of what we talk about. Again, we talked about a little bit about the organizational standards. There are 57 of them for nonprofit and 50, I used to know this number, for public CAPs in 9 categorical areas. And our agencies, I think, have done a really great job about demonstrating that they're well-performing organizations. They understand their boards, they understand their finances, they understand their HR systems, they understand their data collection, and we document that through meeting organizational standards. We developed a national theory of change at that moment in time. This is kind of a graphical representation of who we are, right? A foundation of agencies, states, and infrastructure organizations. We deploy certain services and strategies to fight poverty to achieve now 3 national goals. There are webinars and training on all of these content areas, so I'm not diving into everything in detail. So please know if you have questions or concerns, please email us. We can always link you with other webinars, other training in any of these topic areas. And then we enter the COVID years, right? So we navigated the Great Recession. We got called out by President Obama. We responded through the org standards and Roma Next Generation. Then in 2020, right, COVID. And community action stepped up like you had never stepped up before. This is a graphical representation of trying to capture all the good work that community action did during COVID. And if you've arrived in community action since the beginning of the pandemic, welcome. We're glad to have you. This is trying again to capture that moment in time where we were ready as a network. We responded rapidly. We were the ones putting the food in the back ends of the car, keeping the doors open to make sure people's utility and rent payments happening, that we connected people with health care and vaccines, all sorts of good stuff. And we're here during the recovery phase, and we demonstrate our ongoing resilience. We do have several reports available on our COVID work. So if you ever have anybody in your community that says people don't know what happened with all that money, we got reports coming out our ears talking about all the great work that community action did during the COVID years and during the CARES Act. We were accountable. We spent the money in appropriate ways, and we kept people safe, housed, and fed during a very scary time in human history. This was a global pandemic. All right, well, I'm going to pause to see there's nothing in the Q&A window. I haven't seen anything question-wise come through the chat, so please feel free to ask any questions that you might have. Happy to answer anything. But let's talk a little bit about the structure. So we've talked a bit about our history. So now I'm not going to say we're out of COVID, right? We know that it's still one of the leading causes of death. We have our annual vaccines, and hopefully everyone is vaccinated with the new vaccine or the updated vaccine for the year. But we are now kind of in this space where we are continuing our work. So who is this network that I keep talking about? Well, let's talk about, we have the local agencies, we have the state associations, state offices, national partners, and federal funders. You know your local agency, most likely. But your state association is another group of people in your state that you can access for resources, training, and technical assistance. They are your statewide membership association. Odds are they do an annual conference. They might do webinars. They might have e-newsletters and other things. They might do Roma training cohorts. They might do leadership development. It really kind of depends on the state association. Some are relatively small, some are more robust. But I hope that you see your state association as a real resource. Alongside that, we have your state CSBG office. You also have your state weatherization office, your LIHEAP office, your TANF, your child care, a Head Start collaboration office, but your state CSBG office for community action, right? That's where CSBG flows through. That's who's doing your monitoring. That's who's chasing you for your CSBG annual report data, all that good stuff. So if your agency director talks about your CSBG office, that's kind of who they're talking about. You have a number of national partners, right? In addition to your state association, your state office, we have this national infrastructure to support you as a local community action agency. We're going to talk about each of these entities here briefly. First of all is CAPLAW. They're located out of Boston. They have lawyers on staff who will actually answer your questions. They have a great conference in June. I believe in June of 24, it'll be in Los Angeles on the West Coast. I hope that you'll consider going. Allison Maloof is their executive director, and their website is full of workshops, videos, toolkits, just a ton of information. And they're a great resource on CSBG, weatherization, Head Start, all sorts of good stuff. Our second national partner, NCAF, the National Community Action Foundation. Now, they're not a foundation that they give agencies money. This is an old term that how nonprofits used to be able to be classed as a foundation, but they are a 501c4 lobbying organization. They lobby for us on the Hill for CSPG and weatherization. They've been able to navigate different administrations. We've survived 60 years because we have friends on all sides of the aisle, and that is due to David Bradley's work. That's who I'm showing there in that picture. David is the Chief Executive Officer of NCAF, and I hope you get to, at some point, to go to one of his conferences. I believe he's offering a virtual as part of his conference in March. His in-person version will be here in DC, middle of March, I believe, where we actually do Hill visits as well. Our third organization is NASCASP, the National Association of State Community Services Programs. They are your state offices for both CSBG and weatherization. They do 2 conferences a year, training to help your state offices do their job better so they can be better supports to you as local agencies. You are also able to go to their conferences. I go to their conferences every year, and Cheryl Williams is their executive director. I'm going to be joined by Cheryl, David, and Allison on January 9th for a national partner kickoff webinar for our 60th anniversary. You can find that information up on our website, and we'd love to have you join us, and you can meet all 4 of the national partners. There's also an association for nationally certified Roma trainers, implementers, professionals. Barbara Mooney is the director of ANSERT, and their board is made up of senior level trainers from around the network. They also do in-services periodically around the country. And again, if you're a Roma trainer, Roma professional, you know ANSERT. And if you're not a Roma trainer, I would encourage you to think about doing it. We talk about the trifecta of community action leadership development. I often think the first step in that process is to become a nationally certified Roma trainer, implementer, professional advocate, whatever terminology you want to use. I think it's a great leadership development activity. All right, well, let's talk about our federal government partners in community action. Because CSBG is kind of our designated funding, I want to highlight the Office of Community Services, or OCS. Dr. Laniqua Howard is the political appointee from President Biden's administration as the director of the Office of Community Services. In her department, you have CSBG, SSBG, the Social Services Block Grant, LIHEAP, LIWAP, the Emergency Water Utility Water Program, and Community Economic Development. We also, they monitor states, they issue Dear Colleague letters, they issue IMs or information memoranda. They help provide guidance in terms of how to interpret the CSBG Act during different situations. They're also the ones to make sure that the money flows out to local agencies. And the woman below Dr. Howard is Sharice Johnson. She's the director of the Division of Community Assistance. So we talked about NCAF, CAP Law, NASCASP. We've talked a bit about OCS, right? We also have other key partners, the State Association, certainly Department of Energy, Office of Head Start, HUD. Lux Consulting works directly with tribal entities, National Head Start Association. NHSA also stands for the National Human Services Assembly, and the American Public Human Services Association, all really important partners to community action. That leaves us with the partnership, or NCAP, whatever you want to call us here at the National Community Action Partnership. Our job is to support you, right? Whether you're a local agency, state office, national partner, volunteer, board member, staff, we provide a lot of tools, training, technical assistance, resources. We also do conferences. We have one coming up in Las Vegas in February of 2024, and in Seattle in August of 2024. And again, we do a ton of training around a variety of issues. We do a lot of consulting, and we also do learning communities or learning cohorts around the whole family approach, racial equity, health disparities, all sorts of different things. And those things come up at different times. So keep an eye out for the various resources we provide. And our mission is to ensure the causes and conditions of poverty are effectively addressed and to support you, the Community Action Network. And our vision is a nation that creates opportunities for all people to thrive, build strong, resilient communities, and ensures a more equitable society. Many agencies use our mission, vision, and value statements in different ways. So I'm sharing these with you in case you see them or have questions about them. Please always feel free to reach out. These are the value statements that we talk about with community action. I'm not going to read them all. But today, I think the one that jumps out at me is that we believe that this nation has the capacity and moral obligation to ensure no one is forced to endure the hardships of poverty. We do. I believe it's a political choice that this country has the resources, and I believe we have the moral obligation. Different people think different things, and we respect that. But these are our value statements in community action. And again, feel free to use these in your work, in your grant writing, however you might see fit in your organization. I'm going to pause here. And I know, Mary Beth, you're behind the scenes a little bit. I know I'm scooting through things pretty quick. Is there anything that I have forgotten so far that you'd like to add or put on the table?
I'm taking a quick scan through the chat. I don't see anything. I don't have anything to add. I'm throwing resources as quickly as I can into the chat, folks. And just to reassure you, we will share the slides, and these resources will also, be linked in the slides that you'll receive. So that's all I want to add, Denise.
Thanks, Mary Beth. Yep. I know there's a lot of content here, so we will definitely share the slides. This is our current strategic plan visual. Oh, thanks everybody for the good thoughts in the chat. Appreciate that. You'll see that the partnership, which our board is made up of you as local agencies, state associations, and others, right? It said that what the partnership needs to be doing is advance impact and mobility. We need to help organizations pursue organizational excellence and help align and build the community action movement. And I hope that you're going to see a lot more of the movement building this year as we go through our 60th anniversary. Our drivers for the mission, vision, and values here at the partnership, we believe that equity, hope, and dignity. And I think we saw those terms early on when people were putting the word into the chat about what they hear or think about when they hear community action. And we do too.